when I was in high school, I bought a pair of Gucci sunglasses from TJ Maxx on layaway. And, I paid them off over time. And when I finally got them, I felt like I'd spent too much and I took them back. And I'm sure that I wasted the money on Frappuccinos and CDs, But to this day, I regret not having those glasses. I'm like, they would have been vintage. This was back when you could actually land something that had been in Nordstrom's or Bloomingdale's at TJ Maxx, right? So I regret not having those glasses. I think about that every once in a while. I don't think about my abortion. Even when the topic of abortion comes up, I have to be like, oh, yeah, I've done that.
I'm Dr. Jonah Swartz. I'm here with Dr. Beverly Gray, and this is Outlawed.
So on this week's episode, we talked with Jamilah Lemieux, a cultural critic and widely published writer. Her new book, Black Single Mother, Real-Life Tales of Longing and Belonging, came out this week. She's also a parenting expert and writes for Slate's parenting column, Care and Feeding.
You might be wondering why we're talking with Jamilah on an abortion podcast. She shared her abortion story with us, and her story, like the story of many folks in the U.S., is about someone who's already a parent making a decision to have an abortion. As a parenting expert, she understands the intersection between the seriousness of parenting and making a decision to continue a pregnancy. And we know that 50 to 60% of those seeking abortion in the U.S. are already parents, which is part of why we can really relate to Jamilah's story.
One topic that came up during our discussion with Jamilah was regret. Stereotypes about abortion are steeped in stigma and might make you think that people feel deep regret about their decision. The truth is that most people feel a spectrum of emotional reactions ranging from relief to sadness to joy, and rarely regret. So Jonas, hit us with some stats about regret.
I'm sure that people get sick of hearing us talk about the Turnaway Study, but Turnaway Study really addresses this nicely. They have a number of different papers on this, but they interviewed people both 1 week after their abortion and 5 years after their abortion. And 1 week after their abortion, 97.5% of people felt like they had made the right decision. So we're not feeling regret at that point. And 5 years later, 99% of people felt like they had made the right decision. So the really overwhelming positive emotions about having had an abortion, and really nothing to support anti-abortion dialogues that suggest that people commonly feel regret.
And when you compare that to other types of surgery, that's much lower chances of regret than, say, a knee surgery or back surgery or other common surgeries.
We also talk with Jamilah about her book, which you should absolutely go out and buy.
It tells her story of motherhood, and she also interviews 21 Black single mothers about their story.
I am Jamilah Lemieux. I am a writer, editor, and cultural critic. I generally deal with issues related to race, gender, feminism, and parenting. I am a mother to a soon-to-be 13-year-old daughter. My work has appeared in the LA Times, Vanity Fair, Ebony, Essence, etc. I write a weekly parenting advice column for Slate called Care and Feeding, and I am based in Los Angeles.
Well, welcome to Outlawed. We're excited to talk with you. And as parents of, we both have 13-year-old sons, and so congratulations for making it that far, and, hope that you're surviving as we are.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the excerpt of the book that you shared. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what your journey was to writing the book and how you decided to write a book about motherhood.
I have been talking about writing a book literally since 2010. I think on my first blog, it said her book is coming in 2010. And I worked with a literary agent for about 5 years, going through proposal after proposal. And we'd come up with a concept and it wouldn't feel right. Finally, she convinced me to write about Black single motherhood. And I was very opposed. I had no problem writing about Black motherhood or motherhood, but I did not want to write about single motherhood in any meaningful way, because I felt that if I wrote something about being a single mother, I would be a single mother forever. That I was just kind of cementing myself as that, and that I would be publicly identified with some of the things that people say about single motherhood that I didn't want to be publicly identified with. And I finally gave it some real thought and realized that there were some things that I could have benefited from hearing as a young single mom that I felt equipped to say. I felt that single mothers broadly and Black single mothers in particular have been maligned and misidentified in a lot of ways, or rather, they've been assigned blame for certain things, they've been devalued, and I wanted to defend us. I wanted to write something that adequately reflected my experiences as a child of a single mother and as a single mother myself. And I also wanted to write about having a really fabulous experience. Well, one, just being a single mother and enjoying my motherhood, but two, having a really great co-parenting experience.
What you're talking about before, the stigma of single motherhood, of single Black motherhood, there is tremendous stigma there, but you could tell from even that opening introduction, there's a tremendous amount of pride as well.
I went into motherhood knowing that I was probably going to be a single mother because my boyfriend and I had broken up before we found out I was pregnant, but I thought this was our sign from God. We're going to get back together. He's such a good guy. Of course, he's going to marry me. I felt shame because the circumstances were not the ones that I wanted. But even then, I felt that there was nothing I should feel bad about for being a single mom. There's nothing inherently wrong or broken with being a single mom. Some of our best, most important, beloved figures throughout history have been raised by single mothers. We are not a scourge on society. I've been single parenting for 13 years now, basically. But it really has been in the process of writing this book and talking to these other single moms that I felt a sense of pride about it. That this isn't just something, I think I kind of shifted from apologizing for it. Well, like, yes, I'm a single mom, but yes, I'm a single mom, but I'm accomplished. Yes, I'm a single mom, but I have a great co-parent. Yes, I'm a single mom, but there is no but. I'm a single mom, which means that the parts of parenting that I do, I do by myself, right? And there's a spectrum of single motherhood, and I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation when this book comes out, because there are people who say that I shouldn't identify as a single mom because I have a co-parent, and that single implies doing something completely alone, or that you're a single woman but you're not a single mother. So I think it ignores a big part of what oftentimes goes into the child rearing, the single mother's reform, and that is generally not completely alone. There's a village, there's grandmothers, there's aunties, there's uncles, there's friends, there are other people that are essential to raising children. And what I've learned in recent years from listening to parents from families of all sizes, so, married parents, single parents, is that people in general are not getting enough support from their village. There's this idea that the parents, and oftentimes the mother, is supposed to do all this labor by themselves. Like, it's a relatively new concept that fathers are supposed to be really hands-on and read books and sit on the floor and play games, not just earn a living and come home and hang your hat, right? The biggest thing, though, is just the idea that single mothers can't do it. It's like, no, they shouldn't have to do it alone. There should be a co-parent, right? And then there are circumstances where that's simply not true. He's deceased, right? He's incarcerated. And so the idea that it just doesn't work when it's only us, or primarily us, is just flawed. I mean, it's a sorority that I am proud to belong to, and that I hope to affirm other women that are part of this sisterhood and help them to understand that even if they did make mistakes that led to, the demise of a relationship, that they are not inherently flawed or broken, nor are their home.
I mean, it does make me think about some of the assumptions that we make as providers. And I think this is a challenge for people, right? Like, what type of family is the right type of family, and thinking about people's parenting decisions. And I think we need to be less judgmental about people's parenting decisions, right? Like, they're the best people to make the decision for themselves about the family that they're going to have. Yeah. how has it been to be a voice in a really challenging time in our country for access to reproductive health care?
Yeah. In 2015, I found myself pregnant, and I was not interested in continuing this pregnancy. And it took a few weeks to schedule a procedure. And so, during this time, I am coping with being pregnant. This was my second pregnancy. This time, I couldn't get out of bed. I felt awful. It was really weird. Um, but anyway, I was asked by Planned Parenthood to do some kind of video. And I know this was around the time, well, obviously, people have been threatening Planned Parenthood's ability to provide abortion care for a long time. But there was something, I can't remember what was going on in this particular moment. And so I'm pretty sure it was made clear to me that I didn't have to talk about abortion. Planned Parenthood is always very careful about that, and they're very intentional about naming the fact that abortion care is such a minuscule percentage of what they actually do. But I said, no, like, I have no problem talking about an abortion. I've had an abortion, so I'm talking about this abortion that I have not had yet. But I felt so comfortable and confident, and I would have said the exact same things, had it already happened. It was a really positive experience. The person who was in it with me went with me and paid for everything as he should have. We were very privileged. We were able to, they had at this clinic, it was like an Upper West Side, fancy ladies kind of situation in Manhattan, but there were women of, all walks of life there. But they had something that they called VIP service that we were able to pay, I think, $300 extra for. So we didn't have to wait in the lobby with everyone else. I had a private waiting room with a TV and a private recovery room.
We asked Jamilah if there were other abortion storytellers that she had looked to for wisdom.
I didn't have an abortion role model at that point because I had been a feminist for a long time, had read a lot of, content about, the important, and had written about the importance of protecting abortion rights. I knew Renee Bracey Sherman. I will name that. I knew her and of her work, but I didn't call on anyone. Like, I told a few friends, but there wasn't anyone I could turn to who I knew had been in that situation. And I found out later that one of my good girlfriends, and we went on a girls' trip during our pregnancies, we were both pregnant and anticipating abortions at the same time. And we had both confided in the other girl who went on the trip, so she knew about both of us. But she didn't feel comfortable saying, hey, you guys should talk to each other about this. And we were having very different situations emotionally. But in the years since, I've had more conversations with women in my life, and I realized that so many women I know have had abortions. It's just not something we talk openly about, and so I do really regret leaving that out of my book. But I will say it didn't come to mind because it was such an insignificant moment in my life. When I was in high school, I bought a pair of Gucci sunglasses from TJ Maxx on layaway. And, I paid them off over time. And when I finally got them, I felt like I'd spent too much, and I took them back. And I'm sure that I wasted the money on Frappuccinos and CDs. But to this day, I regret not having those glasses. I'm like, they would have been vintage. This was before designers were making stuff for TJ Maxx. This was back when you could actually land something that had been in Nordstrom's or Bloomingdale's at TJ Maxx, right? So I regret not having those glasses. I think about that every once in a while. I don't think about my abortion. Even when the topic of abortion comes up, I have to be like, oh, yeah, I've done that. Because it was just such an easy, and I was very fortunate that because we were able to, pay for a safe, comfortable situation and full anesthesia, like there was nothing, I felt not great when I got up that morning because I was dealing with morning sickness. And by 12 o'clock, I felt amazing. I could have ran a marathon. You would particularly think a single mother that people are so judgmental about saying, hey, I'm not going to bring another child to this situation. People should be proud of me. Like, okay, she's being responsible. She's being intentional. But unfortunately, it's so much more about controlling women than it is anything else. And I did write an article about it a few years later for Ebony, and I wrote it under a pseudonym because I think that as somebody who was publicly a Black single mom already, that admitting that I had an abortion, I was afraid that, there would be this increased sense of judgment. And so I remember I worked with a male editor who was a very nice man, but I remember him saying, we don't want to make it seem like abortion's no big deal or something along those lines. And I was like, well, actually, that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
But I think you're exactly right, though. Like, so many people don't have regret. They feel very clear about their decision. That narrative is like so important that we share. And there are all these stories about people having these very tragic circumstances that seek abortion, and that becoming the predominant narrative about who seeks care in this country. But the reality is that's not the common abortion story.
So I understand the thinking behind, let's talk about the 11-year-old who was raped, right? Because we need people to find something that makes them say, okay, this thing needs to be legal, But I do wish that the focus was more often on just the common, like you said, it's generally people who already have families, they already have children, and the fact that there's not this sense of horror and regret. This can be, just a decision just as simply as you would choose what color coat, you're going to wear this winter. Just simply, hey, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. The hardest part of the decision, picking out what music you want to listen to during your procedure. That should be
exactly
the experience.
Yes.
Yeah. The latter part of your book, you talk to all these amazing single mothers, and I'm curious if there was a conversation there that you were most excited about.
I talked to 21 other moms, and I think I was most excited to talk to Tanya Denise Fields, who is a friend of mine, longtime activist, and Tanya has 6 children. I've watched over the years as people, including some somewhat noteworthy or infamous, I should say, figures online have attacked her for the size of her family. Even I'll have to say, like when I met her, she had 2 children. And for me, I was at that stage of my life, I was like, I'll never be a single mother. Never could happen to me, So I side-eyed her a little bit for having 2 kids. But, when I got to know her, I'm like, wow, this lady's an incredible mom. She's phenomenal. And then as her family size increased, it wasn't about questioning her decisions, but I just wanted softness and ease for her. And she's created a life for her family that is just beautiful and not always easy, but she's such a, she's a better mother to 6 children. And I think I am the one, she's just the shit. And I want to share that with people so they could have context and see beyond, the stereotypes and the negative connotations that come to mind when you see a single mom with a large family. And I'm just so impressed. She opened up a community center last year in the Bronx. She's been doing food justice for years and has a sustainable farm in the Bronx. And she just touched and reached and supported so many people in so many ways.
As an OBGYN, people often ask us for parenting advice.
They do?
Yeah. Maybe you don't provide obstetric care anymore.
Well, I think I do, but I don't. Maybe I'm not.
Or you're in the position to give advice about parenting.
I think the best advice I can think of is actually something that I've heard my wife say, and I think it was helpful in the moment for me too, which is that nothing lasts forever, even the good stuff. So, when you're going through in infancy, when you're going through those hard times, when the baby wakes up at early morning hours for days at a time, just that will go away, right? It won't last forever. And then the good stuff too goes away. So you have to enjoy that.
You know, my favorite podcast is Rachel Martin's Wild Card.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very end of every podcast, she asks, you know, if you could go back into to a time and like just be present in that time, not change anything about it, but just like linger in that moment, what would it be? And for me, like every time I hear it, I always think about like going back to when my son was an infant. And it was a really hard time. Like he would only sleep if he were on my person. I'm kind of introverted. I like having a lot of time to myself. And so this was a really hard transition being an older adult in life, having someone that needed to be physically touching you all the time. But if I could go back and just, those were such sweet moments. Now he just awkwardly hugs me. But he still loves his mom.
In writing a parenting advice column, how do you approach that? You must face a lot of questions that you don't know the answer, obviously, to. And I'm also curious about what it teaches you.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a level of arrogance that anyone who writes an advice column has to have, because there's no way you face all these situations. Maybe if you're an HR professional writing a workplace advice column, right? Somebody will write in with 6 kids. You don't have 6 kids. So who are you to tell somebody with 6 kids how to, parent? I think I have always been good at giving thoughtful, well-measured advice. I pick and choose very intently about what questions I'm going to answer. And there are topics that I avoid. It's more appropriately described as a family advice column because it's oftentimes parenting. We try to focus on letters that involve parenting, but there are also in-law issues and marital issues that come up. And I was really hesitant to touch those for a long time. Then there came a point where it was like, I don't have to have a husband to understand that yours is treating you like shit. And maybe you just need somebody to tell you that, hey, this is not okay. But I will say this, it's a little disheartening how often the letters come from women. And it's like, hey, my husband's being a horrible husband, or my husband's being a horrible dad. Am I crazy? Am I wrong for being offended that he's completely inept at this very basic adult shit that you're supposed to do as a co-parent? Yeah.
What motivates people to be the type of person who asks for advice publicly, do you think?
You know what? I think for some of them, it's not feeling like they can have this conversation with people in their lives, that they don't have someone they feel comfortable turning to. A lot of the times, they know the answer. It's like, should I divorce this person who didn't speak to me on my birthday? You know what I mean? It's like, you should divorce this person. You need somebody to say it. Yeah, and I also think that with the parenting aspect in particular, I just think the way we parent has become more public. Because I'll say this, I've never written to an advice column, but I have solicited advice on social media. I've just been like, hey, my daughter is just, you guys can relate. You have 13-year-olds. I'm at the point where my daughter knows everything. She knows everything. I know nothing. And sometimes I tell her, I said, it's just, I'm so grateful for you. I don't know how I made it through all these years of life without you, because I am clearly not that smart. And I just needed you here to tell me how to do everything, and so I threw my burdens at the feet of the internet a few weeks ago. And I was like, I need help, you guys. I can't. And, there was no real help. It was just basically like, yes, that is what 13-year-olds do. You're not alone.
I could imagine that people maybe feel afraid to disclose dysfunction to others too. Like if there's something dysfunctional happening either with their kids or their spouse or partner. And
yeah.
It makes me feel like I want to write to an advice column, but I think the hesitation for me is that I think I might be wrong in most of the things I want advice on. Like, I think the objective.
Those are my favorite letters, because oftentimes it is like, hey, this person has done something awful. Am I wrong for being upset? And I affirm them like, no, you're not wrong. Here's some things that you can say to, address it. But oftentimes it's somebody being, often a dad, I hate to say, but just being like completely wrong. Hey, my wife is completely overreacting, right? I think, oh my gosh. I kind of love like having to tell somebody like, no, baby, it's you. You're the problem.
So that's why I don't write to advice columns.
Yeah. We'll just record that segment, and then I can just periodically send it to you. Yeah. You're the problem. The United States is in a maternal mortality crisis. And recently, I guess New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, young midwife from South Carolina died in childbirth, Dr. Janelle Greensmith, and just sort of continually reminds us of what is happening to Black women in this country and just the health risks that they experience in pregnancy. What do you see as an expert, as a cultural critic? Like, what do you see as things that are missing or things that are not being talked about?
Well, I think the fact that people even know there's a crisis now is important. I became aware of it around 2018, I think. There was an article that Linda Villarosa did for the New York Times, and she named it. There's a maternal mortality crisis, and it is primarily impacting Black women. And it was a big piece. And actually, my daughter's stepmother and I started doula training. And we ended up moving to LA. And so neither of us became certified, but I assisted with a couple of births. I think that we do need more of us to take on doula work. Oh, there's just so many. It's hard to even just say a doula is blank, because there's just so many things that they do. But a doula supports birthing parents and, if present, their partners with the pregnancy process, the delivery process, the acclimation to having a newborn process. I definitely think we need more of us, and we need investments into that work from community organizations and individuals and from the government. I worked on a political campaign in 2018 and talk about the Black maternal mortality crisis, and the candidates sat and listened to questions, and we brought in doulas and birth workers. We have to name the problem, to teach women, particularly Black women, how to recognize signs that they're being treated poorly. There's one mother I talked to in my book in particular who was 19 when she gave birth. So she's young, she's healthy, and enthusiastic about young motherhood too, by the way. And I asked her, like, do you ever have any qualms about being a young mom, or do you? And she was just like, no, I want to have my kids out the way early. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an old mom like you guys, But she was treated poorly at the hospital. She was having headaches. She was having all these symptoms. Again, young, healthy. It just wasn't taken seriously. I was one of the first of my friend circle to have a baby. I was a 28-year-old teen mom, I like to say, because in my world, I'm 41 now, and my friend, people are having babies now. I didn't realize that, like, my birth experience was just so much better than so many women I know. I know so many Black women who had emergency C-sections, who just were not treated well by doctors and nurses throughout their pregnancy. So we have to name that. We have to talk about that openly. Since learning this information, I was at an ER once and I wasn't treated well, and I wasn't pregnancy related, but I called it out. And I said, Black women die at hospitals because people don't listen to them when they say they're in pain. So I think it's really important that we talk openly about this, and that, like, if it weren't for Black women's maternal mortality rates, there wouldn't be a maternal mortality crisis in the United States. There's actually a politician, I can't think of his name, a Republican, who said, well, if we take Black women out, there's no crisis, so stop counting them. So obviously that's not the answer, but recognizing that, it is disproportionately impacting one community in particular.
We were actually able to pull up that controversial quote from Senator Bill Cassidy.
About a third of our population is African American. African Americans have a higher incidence of maternal mortality. So if you correct our population for race, we're not as much of an outlier as it would otherwise appear.
I think what's hard for me is that, we're sometimes put in the position where, because of state laws, we are forced into a position where we have to deny people abortion care. So they know that pregnancy may put their life at risk, may disproportionately put their life at risk, and yet we're unable to provide them the abortion care that they want and need. And I think forcing people into this situation where their life is at higher risk, it's a really hard place for everyone to be.
One thing that bothers me in the discourse about abortion is the idea of consequences. It's really, I've heard this sentiment my whole life, that pregnancy, it's a consequence of having sex. And the silent part is having sex with the wrong person at the wrong time, right? If you're pregnant and you don't want to be pregnant, that's the consequence. But I don't think having a child should be a consequence, right? A child should never be a consequence. The consequence is I have to go to the clinic. I have to come up with money for this abortion, right? But like I've heard, once you've had 4 or 5 abortions, at some point you just, or you shouldn't be able to have, you should only be able to have this many. That just the idea of anyone who does not want to be a parent becoming a parent, and it's interesting because there are people who understand that when it relates to men, right? Because you talk about like deadbeat dads and them not sticking around, and it's like, well, he didn't want the baby, you knew he didn't want a baby, right? But then when it's a mom who's like, well, I don't, a woman who's like, well, I don't want to be a mom, that's, well, you shouldn't have laid down.
I think even the young doctors that we train sometimes struggle with people who seek abortion multiple times. And so I think that is an interesting opportunity to help them struggle through that and kind of get to a point where they understand the perspective of the person seeking multiple abortions.
I just don't think we should want anyone who doesn't want to be a parent to be a parent. Like, I think that's the number one, like, hey, you don't want to do this? Like, you just have as many abortions as you need to have. That's your business, like, we don't need children born to parents who decidedly do not want to be parents.
I think you, as a parenting expert, can make that claim legitimately. I also agree with that claim, but I think, it is a serious business to be a parent. It is financially taxing, emotionally taxing, physically taxing. I mean, it's a big deal. And then you're responsible for this human being that will, one day judge you. But I mean, it's wonderful and scary and, not the right thing for everyone all at the same time.
Something that I'm giving a lot of thought to with regard to the maternal health crisis is that I'm still in my childbearing years and I'm interested in having another child. It's interesting exploring that at this stage of life because there are people my age that are going through perimenopause and people my age that are getting pregnant and having babies. It's daunting and scary. One is the idea of starting over. Like I had my first baby at 28, but also knowing just how challenging it is for a Black woman to have a healthy, successful pregnancy in the United States is a weight that when I had my first baby, I didn't know that. So I didn't carry that. I wasn't afraid that we might not make it. But this time around, there's a different kind of sense of anxiety.
Yeah. And I hate that that's the reality for people, that, they come to the hospital to have their baby and they're so deeply afraid when all I want is for them to be extremely excited about giving birth. But I've definitely seen that shift in the last 5 to 10 years, especially for women of color. But I love all your ideas of how we can continue to work to make it better.
Thank you. And thank you for naming the issue and the work that you do. It's so important that it's not just Black folks having these conversations, that everybody, particularly anybody that's providing health services to pregnant people, should be aware of what's going on and, agitated around it.
The bros too.
The bros too.
And the bros. We need to activate the bros.
trying.
That's why they had me on the podcast, just to get, it makes it more comfortable, you know?
Opinions expressed on this podcast are our own. Philanthropy keeps this podcast ad-free, and to donate, you can find a link in the show notes.
This podcast is executive produced by us, Dr. Beverly Gray and Dr. Jonas Swartz, and Stevie Manning.
This podcast was created by Jane Marie.
Thanks to Nick Thorburn, Patrick Ford, and Maker for our score. Extra special thanks to everyone who lent their knowledge and voices to the show, and to Jamilah for talking with us for the show this week. Please check out Jamilah's book. You can order it from most places where books are sold. Independent booksellers are great, including online at bookshop.org. She mentioned a few other options, including the Reparations Club in LA, which has it available online for sale, Call and Response Books in Chicago, and Café con Libros in New York.